here we go.
Welcome to the Nine Route Fantasy Football Podcast.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Nine Route Fantasy Football Podcast. Going into week 14, we are in our final week in our league of record. We have our last weeks of bye weeks, which comes at a crucial time for us in our league and probably for some of you there at home. We're looking at the Indianapolis Colts. So, Jonathan Taylor, you got to sit down for a week for those who have been riding them. The Miami Dolphins, New England Patriots. So, you may have had some pieces from them on your roster. And the Philadelphia Eagles are the fourth and final team, and that will end the bye weeks for everybody from here on out. Everybody's back to starting as usual. Obviously, this is the first year we're going 18 weeks, so everything is a little more drug out. And some people, this is going to affect you in a little bit of a tough way. I think the way the bye weeks worked out, depending on your team, you're kind of wondering, hey, how come this team had this bye then? It kind of killed me. And it's just the luck of the draw. So sometimes people draft based on those needs. But this will finish out week 14. This is the last bye week for those teams. Hoping to make the playoffs. We got a bit of a log jam in our league. And Pat, you are, now that I've regressed and it looked like I might back in, you are joining the party, huh?
Yeah, your backing up is allowing me to possibly slip right by you. We'll see what happens. We haven't played each other yet this season, and both of us, vying for the last playoff spot in our league, get to play each other this week. So luckily for me, as we were talking about a little bit before the podcast here, most of your team is going to be out either on bye or on injury. So I'm liking my chances at least to win the game. We still both of us are going to need a little bit of help from some other teams losing and whatnot. But, it's doable. We were talking about it before the podcast started, like I said, and it's definitely the teams that we need to lose are both have tough matchups. And, it's just a matter of one of us pulling through and scoring enough points to get us into the playoffs. So we'll see how that goes. How was the rest of your week fantasy wise? Your other league?
Not that good, actually. I have to double check the Dynasty League. I don't think I was doing too hot there, unfortunately. But when it came to my other league through where I work at, I had been cruising along and ran into a team that really had like nobody. And let's see, Dynasty League.
Oh wow!
Like a tough loss, it looks like.
Well, you still have tonight. Do you have anybody left to go?
I don't think I do. I'm just taking a peek down the road here.
It doesn't look like it.
I have absolutely. Yeah, no, I have nobody. So that is another loss. When Ray McLeod makes your top lineup, I mean, you definitely were scraping the bottom of the barrel there. So
Ray McLeod and Mike Davis hit your.
Yeah, I saw all the updates coming up yesterday on my phone. Like, had a big play, and I'm thinking, like, wow, that's a first. So, Zach Wilson was my leading quarterback. Yeah, so at least I had Gronk. He had a nice game for me. But my work league, I got banged up because again, the person I went against kind of is mailing it in. They lost McCaffrey, and they even left somebody in on a bye on their lineup, and I still lost. So
I hate that.
One of them deals. I started Jamar Chase instead of T. Higgins. Woulda, coulda, shoulda. That would have probably taken me over the top, but it was what it was. And I had Thielen, who had been doing well once he went out with injury. My starters, I had Javonte Williams, but beyond him, I had nothing.
Yeah, that speaking of, mailing it in, that's actually something that I was thinking about earlier this week. In one of my other leagues, I noticed that a guy that I'm sort of jockeying for playoff position with went up against another team who, didn't even start a defense this week. They're out of it. They're not in playoff contention at all. And, just like you said, just kind of mailed it in. And I want to take a second to, and you and I talked about this a few minutes ago about, losing cultures and on actual pro sports teams and, tanking and things like that. Like, there's no such thing as tanking in fantasy sports. Like, you're not getting anything, but I mean, unless, you do get the first draft pick the following year for having the worst record. which I think is a stupid, you're promoting tanking if that's a rule in your league. But to me, you're doing the entire league a disservice by not at least setting a realistic starting lineup every week. Like, you played week 1 and you were trying your best to win. And now that we're in week, 13, 14 coming up, and you're not trying, you're basically giving free wins away at the end of the season that affect other people in your league. And I understand not caring about a league anymore once you're out of playoff contention. Like, I get like the mental checkout that you kind of want to do, but put yourself in, that other owner's place and imagine if you were the one vying for a number 1 seed or vying for a playoff spot, and the guy that you were going to, you needed this person to lose, and the other team that they're playing doesn't even register a full starting lineup. Like, it's just, I mean, in some of these leagues where, if you're doing like a free league on like ESPN.com or something like that, there's going to be teams that just kind of fade off. But a lot of those people are just trying fantasy football for the first time, may not really be into it. And, halfway through the season, they're just like, I don't want to do this anymore. That's expected. But when you're in a league with people that, especially in leagues where you're paying to get into the league and there's some sort of, prize purse at the end, start a lineup every week. It's rude, honestly, to not put your best foot forward every week. Like, you at least owe it to the other owners in your league to try to win every game that you have each week. That's just my personal opinion.
No, I second that. I mean, yeah, it sucks when you're out of it, when you have no shot and different things like that. Disheartening. You put some time into draft, and I mean, for some of us, again, we do this podcast because we're a little more into fantasy football than other people. A lot of people are really into it. Some people just get into it just to say they're playing, they don't care, or they're in so many leagues that they just don't have enough time to maybe pay attention to, their one, and it becomes kind of the redheaded stepchild, so to speak. And it's like you said, it does, it pisses people off because, like you say, it's one thing if you lose to a team, like, again, yesterday in our league, like, I kept somebody on my bench that, even if I had started them, I was disappointed that I made the bad call, but I had no shot of winning the game. So I can live with that because the other person's trying to win. And you look around, like I said, in my work league, I lost to somebody who hadn't even done anything, to touch their lineup. They're done. They don't care. And it was just the luck of the draw and the irony. Maybe if they had made moves and put people in certain spots, I may have actually benefited from it. I know, Pat, you make it a point to, if teams get abandoned or irregardless, once we get into that postseason, for teams to play in our toilet bowl for top draft picks and things like that, to make sure that the best lineup possible is mandatorily set. So even if the person takes a powder and doesn't want to bother, you make it a point so that it's fair. And that's the way it should be. You have somebody who's trying to play for something and somebody who doesn't care. For those that do leagues like year to year and they're not into them, as much, maybe you don't care, that person stays away and they tried it. It's like gambling to them. But for people like us, we're in a big league. We got a lot of family and close friends. It leaves a bad taste in people's mouths. It's one thing if people don't trade or people don't respond to trades. That's one whole, argument in and of itself. But yeah, when it comes to a lineup and trying to make it so that, everybody had the fairest shot as far as things go. Yeah, I mean, tanking it just creates a losing culture in pro sports. But on something on our level, it's just it's disappointing because it's not even you second guessing yourself and making a bad call. It's the fact that, damn right, well, if you had gone head to head and everybody put their best people out there on paper, at least, then maybe you had a more legit shot. It just always kind of ticks people off. And again, our league being as close as it is, we got a few teams vying for a couple of the last spots. It's one of those things where it's one thing if you lose, you put yourself out on that hill and you lose it on your own, but to know somebody contributed by just not bothering and it kind of screwed you and they go, oh, well, whatever, I don't care. Sure, they don't, but you do. And yeah, if shoes on the other foot, I don't disagree. So, maybe we'll make a rule that, kick that person out of the league if they don't, type of thing. I know some places do that too.
Yeah, and I think that that's completely reasonable. I mean, if you're not going to compete, then you honestly shouldn't be in the league. And I understand, like we said, the whole I'm out of it, so why should I care? But your decisions affect other people in fantasy football, especially in these head-to-head leagues. And if you were playing in a total points league or something like that, where you don't have a win-loss record and you're just accumulating points, okay, that's fine. Whatever it is, what it is, you're not going to accumulate points. You got no shot anyway, whatever. But in these leagues where you beating somebody else affects the possible playoff scenario, yeah, I mean, it should be mandatory to put a lineup. And it is, and like you said, in the league that our league of record, the one that I run, it is mandatory. And I will set your lineup based off of projections if you step out. But that shouldn't have to happen. Like you should just do the right thing and put a lineup in. But I'll get off my soapbox now. I don't mean to put people down. And I feel like if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably not the type of person that's gonna just abandon your team and not set a lineup anyway. I would hope that you would understand and realize the implications of not doing your part to set a lineup each week. So, but enough of that. Let's get into our waivers and streamers for the week. We didn't have as many injuries this week. There's a few, nothing major. No really big name players went down. Miles Sanders re-aggravated that ankle that he had hurt earlier in the season. Initial reports was that it didn't look that bad, but it is possible that he could miss some time. But the Eagles are going on bye this week, like you had mentioned earlier. So possibility that he doesn't miss any time at all. And other than that, as far as the running back position goes, it's basically more the same. It's guys that we have been recommending, talking about for the past few weeks. First, I'll start with Ramondre Stevenson from the New England Patriots. He's about 45% owned, so he's available in roughly 55% of leagues. The last 3 games that both have played, which the numbers get a little bit skewed if you count week 10 because Harris was out that week. But if you look at the week 11, 12, and 9, which is the last 3 games that both running backs played together, Harris is only out snapping Stevenson 71-59, so only 12 more snaps, and is only out touching him 39-34 in those 3 games. So, it's funny. You see Stevenson is rostered in 45% of leagues and Harris is rostered in about 90% of leagues, but basically you're getting similar touches from both guys. And it just, to me, it doesn't make sense. If you have one, well, I don't understand why the other one isn't rostered as well. Stevenson has actually been more productive and more explosive with his touches. He's averaging 4.6 yards per attempt to Harris's 4.2. And Harris has 3 touchdowns. Stevenson has 2 over the last 3 weeks. But I mean, for the type of production that you're getting from Harris, you're basically getting the same production from Stevenson, maybe even a little bit better. And yet he's sitting out on waiver wires, and Damien Harris is rostered in over 90% of leagues. So if Stevenson is out there, you're basically picking up Damien Harris. I would go out and get him. He's definitely a high priority as far as running backs go.
Yeah, no, I do agree. I mean, the one thing I think, like you're saying, where just to counterpoint it or add to it is, the reason he might be sitting out there is because people see New England running back, and it's that old school mentality of, well, it's a New England running back. That means he doesn't get the ball enough and things like that. But this year, it seems like things have changed a little bit where, Harris does seem to be the lead, but Stevenson is right there with him. And Belichick will ride a hot hand, let alone the injury when Harris went out with, I think he had a chest contusion or something. He was a little banged up for a week or two there. But you saw Stevenson step right up. So I think that he's definitely going into the playoffs. He's definitely somebody who could be a play away from being a full-time RB1 in a not explosive offense, but an offense that wins games and grinds out yards on the ground, which you definitely want to pick up some 100-yard games, maybe get a bonus with your running back. So Stevenson should, I think, should be a big part of what you're looking to move forward with. And we talked about a logjam in our league as far as our teams for playoffs. Now we're starting to look at a little bit of a logjam, I think, regarding a certain backfield, so to speak. And that would be the Tennessee Titans. You have a few names here that Jeremy McNichols was the incumbent backup, never expected to play, thrust into duty. He had been more of a pass catcher, but again, he'd only been in for handfuls of plays over the last couple of seasons. Adrian Peterson went down there after Derrick Henry got hurt. You know, they were scrambling. They weren't expecting that to happen. Then you get Donta Foreman, who came in through, waiver wire practice squad concepts and had a little bit more effectiveness than Peterson, fresher legs, and had a younger career that had already been sidelined with injuries, but looked decent. Then there was a plateau, and then you get Dontrell Hilliard come in off of Cleveland's roster and had been, let go and released. And we know the Cleveland running back tree is pretty strong. He comes in and has a monster game, albeit I believe it was in the loss to New England. But he puts up 131 and a touchdown on the ground and does make a couple receptions. He lost a fumble, but he put up 20 points in the week prior against Houston. He had put up 16. Then they go into a bye. Tennessee is still a relevant playoff team. Tennessee is going to look to make headway in a division where it's kind of up for grabs to a certain point. Houston's obviously out of it. Jacksonville out of it. It's them and keeping Indianapolis at bay, who should be possibly even ahead of them. They had some tough losses, but I think Dontrell Hilliard is probably the guy you want to go with out of the three. Personal opinion, I think it's going to be Hilliard. When McNichols really gets back to being fully healthy from concussion protocols, I think he's definitely going to be the change of pace guy. And Foreman, they'll probably ride a hot hand concept. I think the running game as a whole is really going to be dependent on Tannehill in the passing game. I think I saw where Julio's making his way back from hamstring, but yet A.J. Brown's on the IR right now. If they can get the passing game moving a little bit to keep defenses honest, I think it gives one of these running backs, and I feel like it's Hilliard, the best opportunity moving forward to see him put up the stats he did and the numbers he did against Houston is one thing, but New England, a little legit. They do give up numbers to running backs coming out of the playoffs, coming out of their bye week, which was week 13. So they have Jacksonville, Pittsburgh, San Fran, Miami, and another Houston matchup to end the season. Looking rather favorable. I would think San Fran will be a little tough. Miami's a little tough. Pittsburgh, it's been a little hard to tell. So I think overall, I see Hilliard, I see McNichols second, and then I think Donta Foreman, if you have space and he's available, hang on to him. But if you don't have to, I wouldn't maybe rush out to get him. So Dontrell Hilliard to me is the guy. I think he's startable. He's RB2, I think definite flex. But if he's going to put up 15, 20 points a game, I think that's a pretty good guy to have.
Yeah, I think the Tennessee offense is, at least until A.J. Brown gets back and like you said, Julio is fully healthy. Obviously they're dependent on some guys that we're going to talk about in the wide receiver section of the waiver wire, but I feel like more than anything else, they're going to be dependent on this running game. And I do think that it looks like McNichols is going to be out again this week, possibly returning in week 15. But I like both guys this week specifically because I feel like they're going to have to lean on the running game in order to, like you said, they're competing still for they're winning their division. So, it's not like these injuries are hurting them, but they're finding a way to power through. I think this week is going to be a very defensive run first game versus Jacksonville. I feel like they got a really lucky draw coming out of the bye week, getting a Jacksonville team who, unfortunately just can't stop anybody and isn't really good on offense. And I think that both Foreman and Hilliard could both have big games this week against Jacksonville. And I think that, the Titans can probably turn around and hand this thing off, 40 or 50 times and throw only when absolutely necessary and win this game against Jacksonville. So, both guys are owned in just over 30% of leagues. I think if you need a spot start this week, either one. I do agree Hilliard, I think, is a little bit more valuable because he does get a little bit more, work catching passes out of the backfield. but I do think you can start either one. And I think, both will have decent games this week, particularly. But moving forward, yes, I do agree that Hilliard seems to be the more explosive guy moving forward, and the guy that you probably, if you're going to stash one of these guys, he's probably the guy that you want to keep on your roster. The last running back that we're going to talk about is Tevin Coleman. And again, injury to the starter, Michael Carter, has opened up the door for Tevin Coleman to come in, and he's actually produced fairly well while he's been in there. With Carter sidelined, though, with his ankle injury until at least week 15, you should get one more start out of Coleman. Now, unfortunately, it's going to be against a tough Saints run defense, but Coleman has been the guy since Carter went down. He's paced the Jets with 32 carries and 8 targets in the 2 games that Coleman's been out. It's not a great offense. They're not a very high scoring team. But again, if you're in a pinch and you're looking for somebody to get you a few carries and a few targets and potentially score you a touchdown, Coleman seems like he's the guy getting, the majority. Now, he is the guy getting the majority work in this offense. And against the Eagles this past week, Coleman was the only player on the team that had more than one carry. I mean, obviously, other than Zach Wilson scrambling, but they didn't hand the ball off to anybody else more than once. And Tevin Coleman had 11 carries. So, I mean, he seems to be the guy. As much as you and I both thought it was possibly going to be Ty Johnson, it seems like, they do throw the ball to Johnson out of the backfield here and there, but Coleman seems to be the guy that gets most of the rushing work out of the backfield.
Yeah, I think once Zach Wilson came back, things kind of, I guess, maybe reset a little bit offensively for him. And yeah, you've seen Coleman get it, who's still, kind of decent. Obviously, he was getting acclimated with a, new team and a lot of injuries going through, including himself. So getting him to be the starter. And yeah, Ty Johnson, you've seen kind of fade where he looked like, and myself, I thought he was going to be a little bit of a thing, maybe moving forward. But with the rotation of, you had Mike White, Josh Johnson, Joe Flacco, you had a lot of different guys who, again, that's the thing when you have backup quarterbacks playing for a team, while you may not be involved in that starter, those backup quarterbacks, they run a lot of practices with second and third stringers. So suddenly that's the week where you see some guy who is a third or fourth option that normally you wouldn't pay any mind to become a go-to safety valve for some of these quarterbacks. So sometimes that's something to look into, and you can look back on it with some merit. Obviously, if you have a dominant alpha wide receiver out there, he's going to get the looks no matter what. But when it comes to going through their reads and progressions, these quarterbacks, they will always look because they remember, well, this guy gets open for me and I have a rapport with him. So again, those are things to look at. But Coleman, I think, he's going to be maybe one of the few names that's kind of left out there. We're going to move on. I don't think there's any other running backs, right?
Yeah, no, I was just about to say, I nothing really. I mean, you could delve a little bit into that Eagles backfield with the Miles Sanders injury, but with them going on bye and most likely you being in a spot where, I mean, unless you're looking to stash players for, a playoff run that maybe you've already secured your spot in the playoffs. But even still, if you secured your spot in the playoffs, I doubt you're going to be looking to pick up, Boston Scott or Jordan Howard or Kenny Gainwell. Anyway, I don't think that had you had to rely on a carousel at running back, you may have not made the playoffs to begin with. So plus those are guys, like I said, they're going on bye. So they'll be available on the wire next week. And you may actually even find better options on the wire next week when other teams drop those players to pick up, some of these Eagles running backs if it looks like Sanders is going to be hobbled in any way. So I think that's it for running backs. I guess we can move right into wide receiver.
Yeah, wide receiver now, that's a different story where we didn't have a lot of names out there. It looks like there's a few that are, definitely playable and definitely worthy maybe of a pickup based on the matchup. One of the first ones that jumps out, this actually did affect me in one of my leagues, was the Adam Thielen injury. Looks like it's a high ankle sprain. Did I see that right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of those walking boot week to week, see how it goes, possible short-term IRs. We'll see, obviously, in the next day or two, once they get all the tests back, what happens. But I think the guy that you're really going to look for, and he's had a couple games definitely with the way that they play in with the shootout concept that you see. I mean, there's no other way of getting around it. But for the Minnesota Vikings, they just love to pass the football and run the football. They have a high-powered offense, and KJ Osborne had started the season, and everybody was like, "Whoa, who the hell is this guy?" And it puts up 14 and then 20. Then they start spreading the ball around a little. They got Tyler Conklin a little more involved, and the offense started to, I guess you could say, click. Captain Kirk looks to move the ball around, and overall, he's had some strong performances when really thrown to. Now it looks like he's going to be pushed up into that top tier of, Justin Jefferson's Robin to his Batman, so to speak, where, whether or not he's on the same talent level as Thielen remains to be seen. Adam Thielen's been one of the best for the past few years regarding, wide receiver position. Kind of came out of nowhere, really just started to be one of the top 20, 25 wide receivers in football, and then add Justin Jefferson, and the two of them really find a good balance. That offense as a whole moves really well, but yet somehow they found a way to give the Lions their first win this week. KJ Osborne is a player that you probably want to look to pick up, whether it's to fill in the gaps if you're a Thielen owner and you know what to expect out of that offense, or if you are looking for probably a flex position, maybe if you're strong enough already. They're going to go up against Pittsburgh on a short week, so it'll be interesting to see how things go. Most of the Thursday night games have been a little bit low scoring, a little bit more of just let's get in and get out without too many more injuries. That would be a great thing for them. Pittsburgh does give up some points to wide receivers. They're not the greatest. They're a little below middle of the road when it comes to points and things of that nature. So it'll be interesting to see whether it has a strong impact this week. But I think KJ Osborne moving forward he has two matchups against the Bears to finish out the season, and a couple more of those games where you see some shootout ability between Green Bay, and then I believe they are also going against LA, going up against the Rams. So again, they've really been putting up points and throwing the ball a lot. So I think Osborne is a pretty good option for you there.
Yeah, I think as long as Thielen is sidelined, I think he's a guy that needs to be rostered. And, maybe you don't start him every single week, but fantasy football is about acquiring assets. You want to acquire assets that are on the rise. And with Thielen out, Osborne's stock, so to speak, is definitely going to be on the rise. So if you're looking for wide receiver help, I think he's probably a really good pickup. Two other guys I'm going to kind of group together real quick. We've talked about them before, so I'm not going to, go crazy with these two, but Sterling Shepard and Kadarius Toney for the New York Giants. Shepard is about 38% owned. Toney is about 31% owned. Shepard averages a team high 8.6 targets per game when he's on the field. He's supposed to be back. There was actually talk that he was going to be back this week against Miami. Didn't happen. Giants, once again, couldn't move the football. Now, there is a report that Daniel Jones may miss multiple weeks with his neck injury. Mike Glennon is also going through the concussion protocol now. So there is a possibility that the Giants could turn to Jake Fromm to lead them this upcoming week, against a pretty good Chargers defense. So I'm not really loving Shepard or Toney if that ends up being the case. But Kadarius Toney, when Shepard is out of the lineup, averages 11.3 targets per game. When he and Shepard have been in the lineup together, he's only averaging about 4 targets per game. Now, that was also with Golladay in the lineup, which he's potentially out for a few weeks. The Giants are just a mess. Like I said, I think that because of the fact that they have to throw the ball, their team is, their defense is playing fairly well, but they're giving up points and they are throwing the ball still an awful lot. And I think that either Shepard or Toney is a viable flex option. Again, if you're looking for a wide receiver 2 or like I said, a flex for this week coming up. If it does turn out to be Jake Fromm, I would still pick these guys up to keep them on my bench, but I would probably not want to start either one of them, at least not until Daniel Jones comes back. But like I said, I would add either or both of them to my roster if I was looking for help at the wide receiver position.
Yeah, I think you figure somebody's got to make some headway there and be a playmaker. And again, I think being as it's from, and again, I just talked about, just before was, you're talking about a backup third stringer emergency quarterback who's going to come in and, okay, who's he been practicing with? Who's he got his best rapport with? Or who's going to go up and give him that confidence? Say, hey, man, get me the ball. I will catch it every time. It's only going to take a couple plays to see who he leans on. And if he's in there for multiple weeks, that's going to be a go-to guy. And yeah, we talked about Shepard having the performance ability, just staying on the field healthy. Tony, a young rookie who has shown flashes of what they expected when they drafted him. I think that, you might want to dabble in one of those depending on the matchups, definitely. And speaking of teams that are in trouble, and we just talked about a logjam at running back. There's another quagmire, so to speak, at the wide receiver position when it comes to the Tennessee Titans. Lo and behold, it totally shows you that one player was the entire offense. Where I think everybody would have said, "Oh yeah, this guy's going to be MVP candidate and all that stuff," so to speak. And it's true because you really see that what Derrick Henry was to that offense, that they really didn't have any contingencies, so to speak, and it did catch them off guard. So they're trying to reevaluate and trying to move around. The passing game we said was going to help to set up the running game, and you're looking around at their passing game and you're saying, "Oh yeah, they have some wide receivers there. Who's their go-to guy?" Right now, they don't really have one, and that's why they've had some issues. Marcus Johnson had looked like maybe one of the strongest options. He's on IR, shut down for the season. So you're starting to backtrack, and you're seeing again, you see Julio coming back. They really need him. They really, really need him. So now you're really looking between two guys. You're looking between Chester Rogers and Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. Both of them have had some glimpses. Now, Rogers a little earlier in the season, former Colt. Westbrook-Ikhine had actually had a couple decent games. One of them was a 100-yard performance against Houston. The other one was a touchdown-driven double digits against the New England Patriots, where he brought in 2 of 5 targets for 25 and a touchdown. So I think you're seeing this whole offense kind of lag, and these are probably 2 big desperation plays when it all comes down to it. They're coming out of a bye week. That's the one saving grace. So they probably have reevaluated the room, or trying to get the running backs settled and looking at the wide receivers and saying, look, until we get these other names back, we're going to go with what we have. I feel like that the Westbrook play is probably your best of the 2. The volume might not be there as much, just based on, again, it's a run first team. So, you want to turn around and say, okay, well, how many targets and things of that nature, where Tannehill's, this year you've seen him regress, but it's partially not his fault because he hasn't had a lot of people to throw to. Thinking A.J. Brown and Julio were going to really combine to be this monstrous, battle-tested group that's really going to take him over the top. That was the expectation. And I think Westbrook-Ikhine is, targets-wise, in the last 4 weeks, he's kind of that third tier of guy. He's hanging out with like your Zach Pascals, your Quez Watkins, your Tim Patricks. He does have a touchdown. He's got a little red zone action there. Again, Chester Rogers, I see him as still being around, but if you have to lean on any of these guys, you're really just throwing darts in the dark, hoping to hit somebody. You probably could find a better option, but of the people that are out there, and again, maybe you're playing that matchup coming against Jacksonville, coming out of the bye, I think Westbrook-Ikhine is probably your best shot.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that he's the bigger, faster, more like Julio and AJ Brown body type. Yeah. Rogers is a little bit shorter, thinner, more of a
like a slot
type
guy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think if they have to throw the ball, which again, I don't foresee that being the case, but if they do, I do agree that Westbrook is the guy that is probably going to see the majority of the targets. So if you're, again, we're talking deep stuff here where you're really hurting at the wide receiver position. Maybe you're in, you're in a spot like Rudy where half of your team is on bye and the other half is hurt, you may have to turn to a guy like that for, just a 1 week start. But none of these guys are worth rostering and keeping for any significant amount of time. Once Julio Jones gets back, once AJ Brown gets back, these guys are droppable. And honestly, even in a tougher matchup, these guys are probably droppable. So, but unfortunately, that's where we're at right now. The waiver wire is really thin. There's really not much out there as far as serviceable assets that you can plug into your fantasy lineup. So that's why we're talking Tennessee wide receivers. Anybody else wide receiver wise that you can think of that you want to throw in there or mention? Or
I mean, it's like you're saying, it's really kind of tough. I think, some of these folks that are out there that are starting, for the last couple of weeks have started to get a little more rostered or are filling in for people based off of injuries and things like that. I mean, like, okay, you saw, who was it? Jakeem Grant had like a nice game for Chicago. Okay. Because Robinson was out. Marquise Goodwin was out. So it kind of just ran out of options. And it's 62 yards on 5 catches and a touchdown. That's a nice game. Okay. That was in a blowout loss against Arizona. They're going against Green Bay. Do they key on him or people back? I think it's tricky right now because, yes, there's not a lot of names out there and you really are looking for some hot hands. Most of them by this point in the season have really been scooped up. I think it's tough. I mean, you probably have enough people on your bench, but hey, if you go out there, you listen to what we're saying, or you find somebody else that maybe just has that something that might get you over the hump again in a flex spot, maybe hopefully not any higher than that. Definitely we tried to give you some of the names that are available.
All right. Well, a couple more names that are available. We're going to get into the streamers now, and we'll start at the quarterback position.
Keenan Allen on the COVID list.
Oh, really?
Just saw, placed wide receiver reserve list ahead of Sunday's game against the Giants. So this could be a huge Mike Williams week, possibly.
Well, Allen could still come back. If he's vaccinated, they only have to be out, I think, for 5 days. So he may not necessarily
and show a negative test and all that. Yeah, hopefully does make it back, and that's going to tie into one of my tight ends. Okay, great.
Something to monitor definitely moving forward. This COVID stuff, man, it's
it just wiped out the Philadelphia Union, man, for all you soccer fans, which is probably just me. They were a game away from going to the championship of the MLS, and all systems pointed to go. They had a home game against New York NYCFC. And then lo and behold, 3/4 of the starters got knocked out with COVID positive tests. So they had a limp to the finish and lost a tough 2-1 game. But it was COVID that wiped them out. Otherwise, they'd probably be going to the final. So, yeah, it's all across sports. This year is a little different than last year. No bubbles, but they're leaving it up to the players. And you are seeing some big names having to miss time because of this.
It's still crazy to me that we're still talking about this, but well, folks didn't know you were getting a soccer podcast there. The real football.
Hey, come on, lads. Here we go.
So let's get into our streaming quarterbacks. For me, first up on the list is Taysom Hill versus the Jets. The Jets are the 9th worst team versus the quarterback position. And both Hill and Cam Newton, who's another guy that we're going to talk about, have a really good rushing baseline that you don't really get from other quarterbacks, which is why I like Hill versus the Jets. If you watch the Thursday night game versus Dallas, it seemed like the only thing that the Saints could really get going was using Hill more as like a scat back, like a, what do they call it? Like a wildcat type, where he was basically just taking the ball and then running with it. That does sort of give you an extra blocker. And, I think that's something that the Saints could potentially involve into play calls into their offense again, since it worked so well versus Dallas last week. I think they honestly should have stuck with it and maybe could have beaten the Cowboys, but they would get down to the 30 and then decide that now they want to throw the ball for whatever reason. And, with Hill's finger being dislocated or whatever was going on with it, he wasn't throwing the ball really well. So, but I do like the fact that he, like I said, that he still runs the ball. He ran for over 100 yards versus the Cowboys. Alvin Kamara should be back this week, so that should allow him to, be able to hand the ball off or dump it to Kamara out of the backfield and pick up some some free passing yards, just throwing the ball to Kamara out of the backfield. So I do expect the Saints to beat up on the Jets this week coming up. So I could see Hill having, some rushing touchdowns, maybe a passing touchdown, just being accountable for putting points on the board against a pretty bad Jets defense. So I really like Hill this week as my top streaming quarterback. Number 2, I have Cam Newton. Newton goes against the Atlanta Falcons. They're the second worst team to the quarterback position. And, Cam was benched in week 12. They did get the bye. Hopefully, got some things in order, and Cam looks like he should be the starter in week 14. And I'll have a chance to redeem himself against a really bad Atlanta's defense. And Atlanta is not just bad against the quarterback. They're the second worst overall in giving up fantasy points, and they're bottom 8 versus the quarterback, running back, and wide receiver positions. So this should be a get-right game for a lot of the Carolina Panthers. DJ Moore, Cam Newton, obviously. I think Chuba Hubbard could have a decent game this week as well. Atlanta just hasn't really stopped anybody this entire year. And, I think Cam has again, just like Taysom Hill, I think has a chance to maybe rush and throw for a touchdown this week against the Falcons. Number 3, I have Derek Carr reluctantly. I'm going to say Derek Carr versus the Chiefs. The Chiefs have been playing better defense recently. They've been a top 10 defense versus quarterbacks in fantasy since week 6, but they really haven't played a ton of really good quarterbacks in that stretch. So it could be competition. It could be the fact that the Chiefs defense is just getting a little bit better. But in their last game against each other, Derek Carr went 25 for 35 for 261, 2 touchdowns and an interception in week 10. So it was 20, I think it was 20 fantasy points, just over 20 fantasy points in that game. I think that, if Jalen Hurts was your starter, or maybe you don't trust your starter, they have a tough matchup. I don't think Carr's a terrible option. I think he should get you, somewhere around 18 to 22 points. And then last, we're going to hit Ben Roethlisberger versus the Minnesota Vikings. Rudy, you had a great call last week with Ben Roethlisberger as your start of the week. This week, he gets to go up against Minnesota. They are the 5th worst team versus the quarterback. He's not been great this year. Big Ben he's actually, one of the bottom quarterbacks in fantasy. But the Minnesota Vikings have been really bad at stopping the pass. They're bottom 10 in yards per attempt, yards per completion, and passing touchdowns allowed in the entire league. They're not bottom 10 in attempts against them, though, meaning they're bottom 10 in all those statistical categories, but yet teams are not throwing the ball versus them as much as they are against other teams, which means not only are they giving up a ton of yards and touchdowns and things like that, but they're giving them up in an efficient way to where teams don't have to throw the ball as much in order to, in order to rack up those yards and those touchdowns. So I think that in a game where, like you said earlier, the Minnesota Vikings can score, even with Thielen out. I think their offense is still, going to put up points. I believe the Vikings games have hit the over 65% of the time. I think I saw that. So they are scoring points, and I think that they will continue to score against Pittsburgh, even though their defense has been pretty good this year. And I think Pittsburgh's going to have to score to keep up, and I see Big Ben having to throw the ball in order to make that happen. That is all I have for quarterbacks. Rude, I'm going to let you take over the tight end since you love tight ends so much.
Oh, thanks. I tend to. Again, it's one of my favorite positions in fantasy football, and again, it's always kind of saved my bacon a few times around on that level. So the waiver wire is a little thin. Most of your top end options are pretty much owned. So some of these are stretches. Gesicki is going to be out this week. Dallas Goedert's going to be out this week. Those are 2 top 10s that are definitely going to need some substitutions. There's definitely going to be some names floating out there. You might not be sure, or looking at a matchup or how tough the defense is. Again, Indianapolis, New England, nobody really was probably doing much more than streaming those positions. So a couple quick names. Going to go back to the well. We briefly mentioned them last week, and then it kind of did turn into a little bit of a thing with Darren Waller being out. Foster Moreau from the Las Vegas Raiders was going to be the starting tight end for that team. Now, again, he had like a nice game against the Eagles, which everybody and their mother does when it comes to the tight end position. It didn't pan out well. It was a tough road game. They lost tough game. They lost Kenyon Drake for the season. I believe he broke his leg, which is horrible. In a sense, that kind of dials back to the tight end position. If Waller is out again or for any more amount of time, I think they'll probably start to have to force Moreau into the offense more. Again, he's not Darren Waller, no, but he's somebody who should be able to make some plays and start to see the volume. Obviously, it looks like the offense runs through Hunter Renfrow. You got Josh Jacobs back there, but the running game just took a hit, to say the least. Peyton Barber should be the next man up in their backfield. And, you're still waiting for that Bryan Edwards breakout. We're still waiting for that one to happen. So, I mean, Derek Carr, he's a pretty smart quarterback. He knows how to be efficient with the ball. Again, it was a tough matchup against the Redskins, but I do think Moreau is an option for you out there. But going up against Kansas City, who loves to give up points to tight ends as well as most of the other positions. And again, I think that might be a shot for you this week. Another name that's kind of floating around out there, and again, I wouldn't say he's the greatest tight end ever, but Gerald Everett from Seattle. He is quietly fourth in targets the last 2 weeks, eighth overall in the last four. Last 4 weeks, he's tight end 11, and that's pretty reasonable. Again, most of your leagues are 10, 12, maybe 14 team leagues. He lost 2 fumbles yesterday that would have cut into his points. He would have only had about 5. And you say, yeah, well, whatever. But San Francisco is the third toughest against tight ends. So they weren't giving up anything, whether it was Gerald Everett, whether it was Darren Waller, whether it was Mark Andrews, any of your big names. It was going to be a tough road to hoe for him. But to see him coming up with a nice matchup against Houston, who's a bottom feeder and giving up close to 10 points a game against the tight end position, coming off a huge, huge win. And this could be Russ starting to get the kitchen prep to cook, going against Houston. I think that he has a shot to be, again, a 1 week wonder to maybe get you through somewhere in a 6 to 10 point range. That'd be great. And again, that would be totally awesome, even in a flex spot, but definitely maybe if you're looking for a tight end. Joking about Keenan Allen, not joking about his condition with COVID, but that, this would have an effect on my other call here. Jared Cook, he's going up against the Giants. They're kind of middle of the road against the tight end position, about 16th. Cook's gotten 10 targets in the last 2 weeks. One of them ended up being in red zone for a touchdown. He's a big body. He's hands. He's a comfort zone for Justin Herbert. And if Allen is out, obviously Mike Williams, you would think, is going to be the big name to kind of step up. And they have some other guys in the background. Austin Eckler kind of runs the show there as far as the dual role. But I think Cook could be a strong play if Allen is out, especially going against the Giants, who are kind of licking their wounds after, a couple tough games, including losing to Miami. But, they did beat the Eagles. So, he got that going for them. But again, I think Jared Cook has a shot if you're looking for somebody. Staying with the same game, another name is Evan Ingram, who is another person who is quietly worked their way up. I mean, we know all the big names, and we've seen that second level where, Pat, you'll probably agree with it. For a while there, for probably 3-4 years, it was 2 or 3, maybe 4 names. Now you're starting to see a solid top 10 of double digits every week from tight end position. Points, receptions, touchdowns with the PPR, it helps. But I think that, again, a name like Evan Ingram, who had always had that talent, he's going against the Chargers. Again, same game. They're 29th against the tight end position. They don't let you really pass on them a lot, yet it seems like the tight ends do get involved. So they're definitely deep in the secondary. Ingram, he's tied for 6th in targets the last couple of weeks. That puts him in the Freiermuth, Hockenson, Goddard, and Pitts level of targets. So you're seeing Jake Fromm coming in. He's going to look for safety valve city. He's going to look for guys underneath to probably check down to against a tough secondary. Evan Ingram might be a strong play here. Maybe not the yardage, maybe a score, but definitely I think with the PPR, you could see him get maybe 6-7 points just off of receptions. And finally, again, this is another stretch, but if you're desperate, Cole Kmet He is going against Green Bay, which is 12th against tight ends. But Cole Kmet, last 4 weeks, 21 targets. It hasn't panned out as much, but his catch rate's closing in on 80%. So if he is kind of pressed into duty as far as being, again, a check down for Andy Dalton, who has a fracture on his non-throwing hand, or per se, maybe if Justin Fields is healthy enough to get involved, or whatever that third option is in Chicago. Oh, wait, it's Nick Foles. That's right. They do have a third option if it does come down to him. He's somebody who can make somebody's day and knows a little thing or two about looking at a tight end position. So a Cole Kmet is a possible option for you if you're really, really desperate. Again, just based on the volume and possibly the maybe issues at the quarterback position. You figure against Green Bay, they're going to throw everything they have at them. Good luck, because they are owned not by the city of Chicago or anybody but Aaron Rodgers. We know that from earlier in the year. But definitely for the Bears, Cole Kmet might be an option for you on the tight end position. Moving on, we're going to talk about some defenses. And again, streaming wise, you probably might be a little hurting because of Indianapolis. Miami's had a strong D. We know New England does. And the Eagles have had their ups and downs defensively, but some matchups have proven their worth. Going to give you a couple names here. We did talk about the Saints against the New York Jets. Now, a lot of people have hung on to the Saints from last couple of seasons. They have been a little bit on the downward swing. They had a tough game just recently against the Dallas Cowboys. Could be a get-right situation against those New York Football Jets for the Saints defense to pounce on a rookie quarterback and look to really establish something, see if they can finish the season strong and make a push for the playoffs. Again, nice matchup against the Jets. Just talked about the Seattle Seahawks going against the Houston Texans. Houston loves to give up points to the defense. Just over the weekend, David Johnson was out. It was the Rex Burkhead show, and it wasn't really a show. It wasn't even really a commercial. It was just him carrying the ball a few times, not getting involved. They made a switch at quarterback. They took Tyrod Taylor out, put Davis Mills back in. So to say Houston's murky is being polite, and we know that the offensive output is really just one player. It's Brandon Cooks, maybe with somebody else just having a rogue game. So I think Seattle might be looking to build momentum off of this past week, going to beat up on those Houston Texans. Stop me before, maybe, but I want to say the Detroit Lions. They're a top 15 defense the last 2 weeks. I think that, they realized that they have some shortcomings offensively and defensively. But again, they just came off a big win against the Minnesota Vikings. And to be a top 15 defense on a team that you say has no wins, it's some of those wins and losses have been rather last minute. They've had some blowouts, but their defense does put up some decent points. They haven't had a lot of negative output. Going up against Denver, who does give a lot of points up to defenses, Teddy Bridgewater is starting to look like less and less the option at quarterback. Javonte Williams had a monster game, but a lot of that was also in garbage dump off time, but he still did end up with 100 yards on the ground. So there is that to watch out for. But I think Detroit could have a decent matchup against Denver coming off the momentum of their first win of the season. Hopefully they don't have a big letdown, but Dan Campbell might have these guys a little inspired. Another team that has not a good history defensively this year, but lately hasn't been too shabby, the Kansas City Chiefs. Kansas City, last 2 weeks, they're 11th best defensively. So maybe they're starting to figure some things out. Again, you're coming off a bye week, so they're starting to circle the wagons a little bit and starting to make a little bit more headway in their division, which makes more and more teams desperate against them, particularly division matchups, including the one this week against the Las Vegas Raiders. Vegas, they can put up some points, definitely. And this will be interesting to see if it is a bit of a shootout. But again, they're trying to lick some wounds on offense and try to get themselves corrected. If Waller, Moreau, that issue, again, you're losing your change of pace back and you're kind of running out of options. Maybe Andy and the boys take it to them. I think Kansas City's a decent play this week. Finally, again, these are some teams and it's just matchup based, but the Atlanta Falcons, it's a tough division game against the Carolina Panthers. Carolina is one of the worst teams to be giving up points to defenses. We've seen them fall off the map offensively, losing your running back, Cam going from Superman to Clark Kent rather quick. Again, the wide receiver play has been spotty and so on and so forth. The last 2 weeks, the Atlanta Falcons have been a top 20 defense. I mean, when you really look back at it, even this week, they weren't horrible for their point output. We're not talking about real football where they get blown out by 10, 15, 20 points. We're talking about accumulating stats, maybe keeping the score, under 35, 40 points and maybe not giving up a ton of yards, things like that. Their offense has contributed to a lot of those losses with turnovers and points off of turnovers. So I think the Atlanta Falcons have a shot. Again, some of these are desperation plays, maybe, but it's also matchup plays. And if you look at it, Carolina leaking points to defenses in a tough division game where, Atlanta's playing for pride at this point. They might try to take it to Carolina and give you an option, maybe 5 to 10 points. That's honest. That's fair. They're not going to light the world up, but they might be okay. And you never know. Cam has another stinker. He might just play right into their hands.
Yeah, Cam can definitely be the best player on the field or the worst player on the field. So if you get bad Cam, having a defense going against him is never a bad idea.
We'd like to sincerely thank you for listening to the show. You can follow us on Twitter at the 9Route1 and at Scott from Delco. We put out a lot of funny and informative information on there. Our email address, if you'd like to email the show, is the 9routeFFB@gmail.com. Make sure to click the little plus wherever you're listening to follow the show. And if you like what we do, please leave us a review. Good luck this week, and we'll be back next week with more fantasy football info to take your team deep here on the 9 Route Fantasy Football Podcast.